Welcome back to Norway Chess, where we already had a draw. Ding Liren and Magnus Carlsen is waiting to decide who's the winner in their Armageddon match.
Magnus needs only a draw. He's thinking about what is going to be my opening approach to shut down any activity from white. Hands off, the first Armageddon of Norway Chess is underway.
With the same first move. Oh, no, it's not. Ding went for what we call the English opening.
It's
and
moving.
Magnus is doing something interesting again. He is not castling. He's not putting his king into safety, which would have been a very natural move. He's putting his knight on the side.
This is very aggressive by Magnus.
I think
because
so.
He needs only a draw, and usually the approach is you want to keep things solid. But Magnus is already thinking about jumping forward with this knight, bringing it into a play, or rerouting it all the way to the center of the board. Because notice white's pawn structure here. The pawn formation makes this square extremely weak.
Magnus is very comfortable here. He puts his pawns on very natural squares. His king is pretty safe. He might play his bishop in between his king and queen next. Ding noticed the queen is not doing anything over there and goes back. But the engine, you see the eval bar left of the board, it's getting darker and darker, which means the engine likes black more now.
What happens when the clock goes down to 0?
It's a loss.
Yeah.
It's game over.
It's game over.
It doesn't matter what the position is. You could be checkmating your opponent in the next two moves, but you lose.
But we have passed move 40, so they are getting a second per move now. Which is more or less, when they play fast, 1 second is more or less what they need to actually execute the move on the board. So if they keep on making moves without thinking time, they can play forever, but it's going to be very fast at some point. They have to make very fast moves.
And it's on the board. It's finally there.
There we have it.
G5, we've got this. It's once again game on as the dynamics change in the position. And look at those two rooks that were sort of biting granite with that pawn in front of it. Now they're standing at the ideal spot, the only open file in the position. And I think that was very impressive by Magnus to set this up.
Yeah, and I'm curious what will happen because it is also a pawn sacrifice, isn't it? If you trade twice and you can take it, I'm not sure if that's the best. But white is... he takes immediately. So he does not want to lose the control over the H-file, Magnus. He wants to keep that control with the rooks. The trade are happening now. Magnus's queen is activated.
And now I think he's going to get his queen all the way down to the board and start threatening big checks because the king is sort of alone on the other side.
There
and
he goes.
We see Magnus do that.
Yes.
The queen enters. It's actually a checkmate in one. It's a checkmate in one. If Magnus's queen arrives to this square, that's game over.
Oops. Yeah, white cannot play for a win in this position at all.
If anyone, I think Magnus is the one who's playing for a win because remember those pawns, they're under fire. And now it's Ding Liren who has to look for a perpetual at some point. Magnus is going to pick up all the pawns with checks.
Yeah, Magnus was fully ready for it. And we see that now.
That's the first check, the first pawn falls, and he at least has a draw. He's going to pick up a second pawn with a check, I think, because if you go just really quickly, that's game over, that's checkmate in one. You cannot go with your king forward. Ding Liren has to give up a second pawn with a check.
Aye. We knew this was going to happen, and I think it will still end in a draw, but what else could you do, eh?
Magnus is playing for more. He can draw and win the match at this moment, but he refuses a repetition because he's playing for a win here.
Yeah.
Well, this does look a little bit like a repetition now.
I think he will, and you can see it on him. I think
he's actually playing on.
The guy always plays for more. He needs a draw to win the match, but he wants to win the game to win the match. But I still feel it will end in a draw.
Now he has to,
And it's handshake. Magnus Carlsen wins the battle.
So my brain didn't catch up those last moves, but...
But the Armageddon specialist hits again and wins his first. Magnus Carlsen on the board, on the scoreboard with 1.5 points.
Yeah.
temporarily leading the tournament.
Temporarily.
Yeah. I don't think it's less good. I think the whole point is that Magnus realized that the H file is more important than the pawn. It's more valuable to have that control on the file. And it did make his life a lot easier. This probably would have also ended in a draw, but I think Magnus's path was the cleanest. He instead takes the pawn immediately, forces Ding to trade that rook, and guess what? It's Black's queen that captures the open file. Now we can see that white's queen and the king are so far away on the opposite ends of the board. So the perfect time for Magnus to jump into the attack. He doesn't care about his pawns. He's actually threatening a huge checkmate in one. Take my pawn, I'll take your king, with this big check on the board. And after queen comes here, there was really nothing to be done. White is the one who has to be on the defense, and Magnus wrapped it up flawlessly. And that was the end of this one. We got some checks on the board. Magnus even managed to win 2 pawns. But it's also Magnus's king, which is unsafe. Ding's queen looking at activity. And eventually it ended in a draw, which means that black wins the game.